Welcome, everybody. Really excited to have William Lindsay here with us today. He's from the Cree-Stoney First Nations. Although his ancestors are from the Great Plains of Canada, he's grown up in BC for most of his life in rural and urban First Nations community. He has attained a Bachelor of Education and Master of Arts degree from UBC. His B.Ed was completed in the Native Indian Teacher Education Program, and his master's thesis in history studied a history of the Vancouver Aboriginal Friendship Centre in the age of Aboriginal migration and urbanization. I ask you to join me in welcoming William Lindsay.
Great, thanks, Sam. So thanks for coming out tonight, folks. We'll just get adjusted here, so thank you very much. We're going to give you a little bit of a lecture tonight with a slideshow presentation on the Inca, kind of a historic lecture on the Inca people, and tie in some modern stuff, the Inca Trail and Machu Picchu, which I had a chance to visit twice in my life. First time 9 years ago. We didn't really have PowerPoint stuff 9 years ago, so the presentation I have from 9 years ago, which is on the Inca Trail, and Machu Picchu is on the old school slides. So when I brought the slide projector in, I'm sure some of our young techies here were going, "What the heck is that?" So, but also if we have time, I went back last year for a conference down, an Indigenous Education conference to Cusco, and had a couple extra days to revisit the Machu Picchu and Cusco. For just a couple of days and see the Sacred Valley there, which I didn't have a chance to see the first time. And it was a wonderful adventure. So if we do have some time at the end of the slides, I have about 80 slides or so. I have some photos which are from last year. We have kind of two different eras here and a couple of different parts of Peru depicted herein. I guess I should introduce myself a bit more. I'm the director of the Office for Aboriginal Peoples at Simon Fraser University, which means that I pretty well cover and work with everybody on the campus and off the campus on all things to do with Aboriginal people, which I am, being a First Nations person in this country. So I have a really fascinating job. I get a chance to teach as well. So I'm a long-time teacher. I've taught at elementary level, I've taught at high school, I've taught at college level, and I've taught at the university level as well. So I've had a chance to kind of hone the craft of teaching as I've gone along. So, and this lecture I'm going to give you while we're watching the slides. So what we're going to do is show you a few slides, give you a bit of an explanation, and then give you a bit of the lecture, show a few more slides, go back to the lecture. So we're going to go from modern to ancient here. So, all right, and so here we go. So, and I understand some of the audience have already been to Machu Picchu and Peru. That's quite thrilling. And some of our young gentlemen in the back here are planning to go in a couple of months. So very interesting. So I'm hoping that tonight's lecture will revisit some memories for you and also prepare you for a wonderful adventure that you're going to have. So one of my dreams when I was growing up was to travel. My dad, even though we lived on the reserve, my dad had a subscription to National Geographic magazine. And so those of you who've ever had subscription or had a chance to be regular readers of National Geographic know that they look at different areas of the world. And so when I was a young boy growing up, I was always reading these fascinating magazines with glossy photographs of these different places on our lovely planet that showed places but also cultures and people. And it was just honed a desire in me to want to travel. And so when I graduated in my mid-30s with my teaching degree and started teaching, one of the first things that myself and my wife did were started to travel in the world. And so since 35 up to now, I'm 50 now, we have been to, I think, Alaska, about 20 different countries over the last 12 years or so. And Peru is near the top. So if I had to, looking at those 20 different countries we visited in the world, South Africa would be number 1, and Peru would probably be number 2. So I'm hoping that through the talk and slides tonight that you'll be able to see why I rank Peru so highly on the travel list. So what we're going to learn about with regards to the lecture itself is learn about pre-Incan societies that existed, the Spanish, the conquest that occurred, geography of Peru, a bit of history of the Inca culture, life in the Inca world, the Inca roads, which went up and down the mountains, the Andes, learn a little bit about the Inca religion, family and marriage, their burial customs, and then we'll end off talking a bit about Machu Picchu. So we only have a short time tonight. You can make a whole course just on the Inca and have a whole lecture on all of these different components I've just mentioned. So it's kind of a crash course, if you will, on the Inca tonight with our lecture here. So I'm just going to grab my... I had to revisit how to use this today too. I got it out and put the slide tray in and looked at the pieces and put it all together and just made sure I remembered how to use it. So what we see on this map up here, ladies and gentlemen, is the extent of the Inca Empire that was spread through a big part of the western side of South America. And there's different colors up there are representative of the different territories, because the Inca, they conquered quite a few people actually. And so what we see up there is in those different colors are some of the different societies that the Inca people ended up conquering. So just to name some of them, the Chavin people were the first great interregional civilization. They emerged in the first millennium BCE. The Nazca were on the south coast, and the Moche on the north coast of Peru. They were around about from 100 to 600 CE or AD. The Huari Tiahuanaco culture imposed regional conformity, and they were around from about 600 to 1000 CE. And the Chimu Empire was around from about 800 to 1400 CE, and they dominated the valleys of northern Peru. So there were these different groups that were around before the Inca came into being. So the Inca just didn't kind of just appear and take over by themselves a huge area. There were other cultures that existed beforehand that actually laid the groundwork for the Inca people. So these early Andean societies built major ceremonial centers throughout the Andes, constructed elaborate irrigation systems and canals and highways. They created exquisite pottery, textiles, and metalwork, and so they thus laid the groundwork for the great Inca Empire. So the Inca people actually borrowed ideas from these other cultures. And the Inca weren't around that long. They are known by people. Even if you mention the Inca to little kids, they'll go, yeah, I've heard of them. So the Inca are well known, but they weren't around as a dominating empire for that long, only for about 150 years or so. Before the Spanish came, and then we had the Spanish conquest. So the Inca were the second great Native American civilization in the Americas that were conquered by the Spanish, with the Aztecs being the first in central Mexico. So these pictures were taken about 9 years ago, and I didn't have a gray hair in my head in those days, and I have many now, as you can tell. So the airport has been much modernized in Peru, in Lima, where you would have to fly to connect to get to Cusco. The Cusco airport hasn't quite been modernized yet, but when we were flying from the capital city Lima, which is near the coast, to the interior, the city of Cusco, which is kind of the gateway to Machu Picchu, we had to fly on these planes where, you literally, they pulled those stairways up to the doorway of the airplane and you had to walk up. So it was like, watching those movies from the 50s and 60s where, you had these old airplanes and airports which weren't modern by any means. So it kind of took us back in time, flying to this city, which is Cusco, a very beautiful city in the middle of the Andes Mountains. It's very much a Peruvian type city, but they still have a lot of Inca architecture there, and Spanish influence as well. So those of you who've been there will know that, and those of you who are going there are going to see that. And one of the influences from the European era that they have are these squares. And so throughout Cusco, they have these big squares. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the major squares coming up here shortly. And they are sure music-loving people. So at the airport, you're going to have people, musicians welcoming you with drums, guitars, and those pipes, those kind of pan-like pipes, which you're going to see a lot of and hear a lot of there if you go there. And they come into the restaurants as well. So what they'll do is you'll be sitting there eating your meal quietly, and all of a sudden the musicians will come in and they'll play 3 or 4 songs and expect you to give a little tip afterwards, and also we'll try to sell you their CDs afterwards as well. And they're really good musicians, and it's really good music. So I was more than happy to contribute to their efforts, because that's how they make their living. So here's one of these squares here. In the capital of Cusco. So just to go back to our lecture notes here about the Inca. The Inca, like the Aztecs in Mexico, had conquered many neighboring states and tribes. And so by the early 1500s, they ruled over several million subject indigenous peoples in the parts of South America that we saw up on the map in the first slide there. And so these indigenous subjects were forced to build Inca cities and roads, which, when you say roads, they weren't like the roads we know today, of course, and they weren't even like the Roman roads, which are, the Roman roads are still in existence today. They're still really well made, and, they kind of look like roads, the way the stones are put. But the Inca roads, they go up and down, mountains. And so they're essentially, cobbled mountain trails, made of rocks on the road. And so the indigenous subjects of the Inca Empire were compelled to build these roads, to farm Inca lands, to build irrigation systems, and also to fight for the Inca Empire. In 1531, Francisco Pizarro, who will forever go down in history, inspired by Cortez, another guy who will go down in history in Mexico, undertook a campaign against the Inca. And so his force was quite small, actually. He only brought a couple hundred men with him, but they were armed with the most modern armaments of the day: guns, cannon, swords, armor, horses, and probably most importantly, diseases, towards which the indigenous peoples of the Inca Empire had no immunity whatsoever. And so the Inca kind of mysteriously let the Inca advance over the Inca roadways. And these roadways are such that they could have easily ambushed the Spanish if they had wanted to. The roads are narrow, they're winding in territory through up and down mountains that is familiar to the Inca. So why did the Inca not take advantage of this? Well, it was felt by some that the Inca curiously watched the Spanish, kind of waiting to see what they would do. But while they were waiting to see what the Spanish would do, disease epidemics started to break out among the Inca peoples. Of course, diseases brought by the Spanish to which there was no immunity. And that happened here in Canada as well, and in the United States. So probably smallpox was the biggest disease that was brought over here amongst many, and the indigenous peoples, having no immunity to these diseases, died by the millions, all over the Americas. But there were a couple of the things that went the other way that people usually aren't familiar with. Tobacco was grown here. It was one of the few places in the world where it was grown, and so the tobacco industry, which still unfortunately kills millions of people today through various diseases, was a result of the tobacco that was grown here in the Americas. And also there was a form of venereal disease that the Aboriginal peoples here had largely grown immune to, that the Europeans weren't immune to. And so they ended up taking these venereal diseases back to Europe. And without penicillin, which wasn't around in those days, one of the results of this venereal disease was you lost your hair. And so what the result of that was is these men in Europe started to wear these long wigs because they had grown bald. And then it became a fashion statement afterwards. And so when you see in these historical dramas or drawings of these European men from the 15, 16, 1700s wearing these wigs, that's a result of what we're talking about here. Now, if you tour some of the churches, which are very old, some of these churches were built hundreds of years ago, in the 15, 1600s, and you find these very elaborate wooden carvings inside the churches that where you see a mixture of cultures. You obviously see the influence of Catholicism in some of the carvings here in these churches, but also you can't really see on these slides here, but on other parts of the carving, you'll see Inca designs and parts of the Inca culture that are carved into the drawings here, and so you see sort of a mixture of cultures if you have a chance to go into the churches. A very beautiful work. So it was the Inca people that actually did the carvings that we see here, and you can see some paintings up on the wall there as well. These paintings are very old as well. Very historic paintings from the 1600s, and you're not supposed to take a flash camera with you, and I didn't see that sign there saying don't do that, and I was just taking pictures, took a few pictures of some of these pictures which were up, or paintings which were up on the wall, which I guess over time, if the flashes tend to dull the paintings, so you're not supposed to do that. So, but anyway, there's a few of the paintings in the background there. And you'll have these families come into the squares, and they'll bring these little baby llamas with them, So, for a couple of pesos, their form of money there, you can just give it to them in coins, and then you can take a picture with the indigenous peoples of the land there today, and also the cute little llamas that they have there. And here's one of the famous animals of the Inca Empire, and I don't have my slide notes with me here, but this is either a llama or alpaca. I forget which one it is, and I used to be able to tell the difference. So, these animals were used for all kinds of things. They were pack animals. Their rough wool was used to make rope and different outer garments, and they were used for sacrifices, and their bones were used for tools and all kinds of things. So these are the real work animals of the Inca Empire. And as well, it's kind of funny because they can be quite stubborn as well. So if you load too much on them, expecting them to haul it, they will rebel, and they'll just sit down, and they won't move. And so they sort of have a limit, which is kind of interesting for an animal, because I don't know any other animal that sort of acts that way. Here's the narrow cobblestone streets of Cusco. And the indigenous peoples there look a lot like the indigenous peoples here. They're dark. They have all their hair. They're good looking. Right? So there you go. There's some of the indigenous peoples. And there's many, many tourists from all over the world that come to Peru today. In fact, much like the West Coast Trail, it used to be a free-for-all. You could just kind of go on the trail before. But now you have to book, and it's like that with the Inca Trail now. You have to book people to take you on the trail just to make sure that there aren't too many people on the Inca Trail. And I'm not sure what they're going to do about Machu Picchu, because it's getting quite, I don't know how to put it, but there's lots of tourists there as well. And so the grounds are, the grasses are getting, wiped out because of so many tourist feet in the area. So they might have that as well as a rule coming down the pike as well to visit Machu Picchu. You might have to book your time there as well. So just to go back to the lecture for a second here, in late 1531, the aforementioned Pizarro, he lured the great Inca chief Atahualpa into a conference. The Inca chief Atahualpa, he came and he brought a big party with him, but they didn't bring any arms. They came unarmed, expecting it just to be a peaceful conference. But Pizarro and his men attacked the largely unarmed Inca party, And Atahualpa was captured, and thousands of his followers were slaughtered, all unexpectedly. And Atahualpa tried to ransom himself by having gold transported from all over Peru. But the Spanish figured that Atahualpa couldn't be turned into a puppet ruler, so they executed him anyway. So the head of the Inca was gone. So you lose your leadership, you lose some of your best soldiers coming to a conference which you believe is going to be one of peace. And so this is sort of how the Spanish were able to conquer this empire with very few men. Thereafter, the Spanish brutally overran the rest of the Inca Empire. They used brutality and ruthlessness. They had superior technology, guns, armor, and cannon, as I mentioned. They used trickery, as this meeting with the Inca leader here shows. They took advantage of the Inca, who were slow to act, as the Spanish, landed and marched right into the middle of their empire. And of course, they had disease, which was essentially biological warfare, and they used it to great effect, although it was kind of unintentional. And also, they used indigenous allies. The Inca, as I mentioned previously, had conquered many subject indigenous peoples around them, and so these peoples had a great deal of animosity towards the Inca Empire. And so the Spanish used these indigenous peoples as allies, and they were able to overcome the Inca people. So the conquest of the Inca stands among the most brutal episodes in modern Western history. Puppet rulers were set up under Spanish control. The Inca were largely enslaved. Many of them became addicted to alcohol, which the Spanish were happy to bring in. And they also became addicted to coca leaves, which were in abundance in the area. And the land was raped of its gold, its silver, and other precious metals. In fact, there's a great silver mine that's very famous called Potosi. It opened in Peru in the 1540s, and enslaved indigenous peoples were used to strip the great mountain of all its silver, hundreds of millions of dollars worth that were taken back to Spain in their great galleons. So today, Potosi, which I haven't had a chance to visit, is basically, it's been stripped of its silver. It's a honeycombed shell of a mountain, but it's very famous, infamous in fact. Legends are told about this mountain, and songs are sung about it. So the great and sprawling Inca civilization, which had only lasted for less than 200 years, basically faded away, coming under complete Spanish control by the 1560s. Now, here's something very interesting. When you go to Cusco, if you've been there, you'll recognize this. The Inca were extraordinary builders, and so the Spanish tried knocking down a lot of the Inca buildings, but the Inca buildings are so well built that they kind of got tired of trying to knock them all down. So what they did was built their Spanish-style buildings on top of the base of Inca architecture. Inca bases, and so that's what we see here. That's original Inca work that you see in the bottom half of these Spanish-style buildings there. This is the Temple of the Sun in Cusco. So there are a couple of places that you should see in Cusco for sure. One of them is the Temple of the Sun, and that's a picture of it there from a distance. That's a bit of a close-up. And this is one of those buildings that the base of it is Inca architecture, and the upper part of it is mostly Spanish architecture as well, although some of the rooms, the walls of some of the rooms are Inca architecture as well. And again, the Spanish, they wanted to knock down these temples. That was just what they believed that they should do according to their Catholic beliefs. But they thought, well, it's too hard to do. Why don't we just build our churches and stuff right on top of the Inca buildings? And that's what they did here. So that's inside the Temple of the Sun, so you can see very much the Spanish type architecture there. But in the background, you can see an Inca room there that's made out of Inca rock, but rock that was carved by the Inca to create that room that we see in the background there. And here's one of those pictures that's quite hundreds of years old, so you can very much see the Catholic influence there. So there's lots to see in Cusco itself. So people go to Peru to see Machu Picchu, but you got to go through Cusco. So I'm hoping that you spend some time in Cusco, at least 2 or 3 days, to look around some of the sites there. And through Lima as well. You have to go through Lima, the capital city. And so it's always been one of my dreams to go to a soccer game in South America. So that's what I did when I was there. And I got to admit, I've been to Stanley Cup final games. I've been to Grey Cup games. I've been to finals for the Memorial Cup. But the most exciting sporting event I was ever at was at a soccer game in South America, in Peru, between the two top teams in Peru at the time. There's tear gas, there's smoke, there's flares going off, there's barbed wire to separate sections from each other, there's drums. You're just looking around in awe at what's happening. So if you have a chance while you're in Lima or Cusco, where they have their own team, to go to a soccer game, I'd highly recommend it, because it's something that you'll never forget. So just a little bit more about the geography. There were many geographic extremes that existed in the Inca Empire and exist till today. There's the Andes Mountains, of course, which is one of the great mountain ranges of the world. It dominates the area. So these mountains rise up to over 20,000 feet. And so when you're flying from the capital city Lima to Cusco, you'll see some of these mountains. And to the west, there's plains and deserts that border the Pacific Ocean. And to the east, there is a steamy jungle rainforest that reaches into the interior of the continent. In fact, the headwaters of the Amazon River start in Peru, that's one of the places where the headwaters of the Amazon starts. So you have quite a mixture. You have mountains, you have plains, deserts, and jungle rainforest all in one country. So it is a land of geographical extremes. So this wall was built hundreds of years ago, and you can see, wow, look at that. We couldn't do better than that today with all of our modern implements. And the tour guide showing us around was showing us trying to shove a piece of paper in between the stones, and he couldn't do it. So that's how well carved the stones are. You can't shove paper in between the rocks that you see there. And the interesting thing about the walls, they're built kind of at an angle inward. And so as a result of that, because of the way that they're built, they survived many tremendous earthquakes, which have destroyed other parts of Cusco over time. So the Inca knew what they were doing. And so these things that you'll have seen or will see when you get a chance to go there, these things have been standing for hundreds of years, and they will continue to stand for hundreds of more years. And so the Spanish, when they left walls up that were Inca, they tried to put plaster and paint some of their Spanish designs on the walls, and that's what we see here. And this picture, which was on one of the walls, just shows how the Inca were able to move those huge stones around and were able to sort of pile them up. They had a log and rope system which enabled them to move these, and lots of manpower, which enabled them to move these huge stones to create the walls that we've seen in some of the slides. And so here's just a picture of sleepy Cusco one early morning there, and the water and the sewer runs down the right side there. And, so you can see, when an earthquake happens, as has happened in Cusco, that it, has the potential to destroy large parts of the city, because, as we see here, the walls of the modern buildings built in the 20th century, aren't that well built. Pack of dogs. There were packs of dogs everywhere. So that's another similarity. I was going to mention some similarities between the indigenous peoples here and down there at the end of the lecture. And, one of the similarities is dogs. If you've ever lived on the res, like I have growing up, there were always dogs around. And when I was in Cusco, it seemed like there were always dogs around as well. And there were dogs on the Inca Trail as well that were following the people because they knew they had food and were get fed. And there was a legend, I don't know if it's true or not, about a dog that kept doing the circuit. He would do the Inca Trail following people and then catch the train back, and they would let him and then go do it again. So that's a story we were told. I don't know if it's a legend or not, but that's a story we were told. And there's museums there where you can see some of the Inca gods that were carved out of stone. And some of their implements for grinding some of their grains that they ate, and some of their pottery as well. So these were really well-made things, as we see here. So just back to the history of the Inca people. Their empire, as I mentioned, was extensive, covering all of Peru and Bolivia, northern Chile, and southern Ecuador. And Cusco was the center of their kingdom. It was the capital of their empire. So when you're in Cusco, that was the center of Inca power there. The Inca language was, forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, Quechua. I've heard it pronounced different ways. But as many surrounding nations were conquered, it was not the only language spoken in the empire. And this language, Quechua, is spoken today. So Spanish is a dominant language in Peru, but they do have indigenous languages spoken, and also the language of the Inca is still around as well. Now, the head of the empire was called the Inca, and it was believed that he was a direct descendant of the sun. So the role of the monarch, the Inca, as he was called, was passed down from father to the eldest son of the Inca queen. And the head of the empire, the Inca, was also head of the priesthood. He commanded the armies, and he was in charge of all taxes and laws. So this head of the empire, the Inca, was pretty much an all-powerful emperor when the empire existed. So for all intents and purposes, a dictatorship existed, as the Inca, the monarch, was the source from which everything flowed, as it was said. And the Inca nobility were believed to be descendants of the sun that we see going across the sky. Such men held the highest stations in society, the court. They were the court officials, the highest military officials, and they were members of the priesthood as well. And when they conquered other peoples, they were not allowed to become Inca nobility, even the highest nobility of the other conquered peoples. So power thus stayed concentrated among the Inca people themselves. So the Inca had a very tight-knit society. Kinship groups made up the basic social structure. They were called alu. So such was the structure of the stable Inca civilization, although it was stable because of force and exclusion, based on what I've said here so far. Okay, back to the slides here. So what happens if you're on a tour group that's going to do the Inca Trail, which is basically a 4-day hike, and you get to Machu Picchu on the 5th day? There's a couple of ways you can get there. One is by train, and one is by a van or bus if you're with the tour group. And so when we were there, we went from Cusco to the start of the Inca Trail by van. So along the way, we had a chance to take some pictures here, and we can see a little herd of llama here on the. So they're like their horses or cows there. You see them everywhere. This is the interesting animal. This is called the vicuna, and this animal is different from the other animals there in that it has very fine fur, and so its fur provided the finest garments for the emperor, the Inca, and the nobility of the Inca peoples. And today you can still buy sweaters that are made of vicuna fur that are the most expensive, about the most expensive sweaters you can buy. So I didn't buy one. I bought the cheaper sweaters that were Inca design. But this is a vicuna, if you hear that about that animal when you're down there. This is a fortress overlooking Cusco itself. So this is some place that you should see for sure if you're visiting Cusco. It's called Sacsayhuaman, which is easy to remember because the tour guide said, just think sexy woman. So for some strange reason, I've always been able to remember that Sacsayhuaman. So it's a fortress basically overlooking the city of Cusco. And it was basically torn down, mostly torn down by the Spanish, but the base of a lot of the buildings still survive. But you can see how big these stones are and how big the fortress was by the size of the people there. There it is again, so you can see how big it was. And when I was at the Indigenous conference there last year, people were there from all over the world that were Indigenous, from New Zealand, Australia, all over the Americas, South America, and this is where we had our opening ceremonies, was at this site here. So just another picture showing it. So, the beautiful architecture, just wonderful architecture. And so here we are, ready to start the Inca Trail here. So sorry, ladies. Yes, I am a married man. This is my good wife up here, who couldn't make it here tonight. But for sure, get a walking stick. Don't forget to get a walking stick, because you're going to be going up and down mountain ranges. And so come in shape. If you want a piece of advice, come in shape for this hike, because the West Coast Trail was a piece of cake compared to this hike on the Inca Trail. You're basically, it fools you, because the first part you're going flat, a little bit like this, say, next to rivers, and then suddenly you get to mountains that are going like this, and then down, and up, and then down. So you better be in some kind of shape. And both my knees, I had a hockey injury, tore some ligaments in my knee the year before, and or 2 years before, and I thought I was okay. Got biking again, walking, went on the hike, and both my knees swelled up like grapefruit. So by the second day, my knees were about this big, both of them. So just come in shape if you're going to do the Inca Trail hike. These are some bricks that are drying out. So a lot of their buildings out in the country, in the rural areas, are still made of bricks, done in the old-fashioned way, that were, buildings are made of bricks that were lying out drying in the sun thousands of years ago. And that's how a lot of the rural people in Peru still make some of their buildings out of these kind of bricks today. So it's just to say something about, just want to go back here, about modern Peruvian society. It's, I guess I was a little bit touched by the poverty that I saw, and so I asked the tour guide about it. I says, about the poverty, does it bother the people? And he said, we do have a lot of poverty in this country because the main economy of Peru is agriculture. And but he said, as long as your family has a roof over their head, has food, and your family members are healthy, then the family's happy. That's sort of the attitude that the Peruvian people have there. So that's their philosophy, and that was right from someone who lives there. So, and away you go. So you start. Here's the head of the Inca Trail here. So you got to show your passport at that booth that's just on the right there, and then you walk across that bridge, and then you start walking up that valley there. So your first day is kind of, pretty well flat. There's a little bit of rises up and down, but it's not too bad. And so you're walking along, enjoying this beautiful scenery. The mountains are different there. They're different from the mountains here in BC. I've seen the Himalayas as well. I was in Nepal last year, and they're different. So I've seen some of the great mountain ranges of the world, and these mountains are really different. You can tell that just by looking at them. And so here's sort of what the modern trail looks like. Another shot of the trail, some of the mountains and flowers. So there are different kinds of flowers and birds. If you're into that bird watching and looking at different kinds of flowers, there are different kinds of those kinds of things along the trail as you go along. And there are people that live along the trail, and so you see people that you'll run into someone like this chap here with his horses. He's going to get supplies, I guess, and going to bring them back. So there he is. You can see that little hole in the cliff there. This is something else about the Inca. I'll get into that a little bit more in the lecture here, but the Inca would bury their dead much like the Egyptians did as mummies, and they would give when they put them into the ground or in caves, they would put a lot of their articles that they enjoyed in life with them. And so that little hole in the side of the mountain there is one of these caves where the dead were put. And we didn't actually go down to this place. We bypassed it, but we were looking down. You can see a river, and that's the first Inca ruin that we saw along the Inca Trail. And so in a lot of travel brochures I see about Peru and the Inca Trail, and Machu Picchu has this picture on it here. So you'll remember this when you go there in January there, gentlemen. And you basically, on a tour on the Inca Trail, you have people who do all of your packing for you. So they'll carry your big pack sacks. They pack the tents, the food, the turlet, the food, everything, the stove. So you can enjoy the Inca Trail. Basically, you take a day pack and some water, and they'll run ahead, these chaps, and set up the tent, and where you sleep in and set up the cooking tent. So you're treated like, really good on the trail. So that's one great part of it. So if you're not quite in shape or have injuries like I did, it was kind of nice to be able to give my pack-sack over to somebody. These guys don't get paid a lot, but so they do pass around a tipping envelope at the end of the tour. And so, out of graciousness, we gave an extra large tip, and talked to our British friends about it that we were on the tour with, a few British doctors, and so we gave them a pretty good tip that they were happy with. But there's what you sleep in when you're doing the Inca Trail. And there's the toilet. So someone packs that as well. And he's got to pack the toilet as well. So I guess that's a low man on the totem pole. The guy who starts new, he's got to be the guy who packs the toilet along the Inca Trail for a few days. This is some of the living accommodations and places, that we saw as we went along the Inca Trail. And there's a green parrot of some kind on the roof there, if you notice him on the wooden beam there. But you can tell these people aren't very rich, and so, that's why I was talking to the tour guide about, poverty in the country. And, as he said, hey, if you have a roof over your head and food and your kids are healthy, you're generally happy. Yeah? And so here's a picture of that parrot up close here. So there are lots of birds if you're, what do you call a bird watcher, ornithologist or something like that. So if you're one of those people who really love birds, you'll see lots of different birds along the Inca Trail as well. So here's some of our tour mates there. Those are, I think, 4 British doctors, as I remember it there. And to become a doctor in Britain, it only takes 5 years, as I recall. So I remember that point from them. So generally on these kinds of tours where you're going to places that are known worldwide, you're going to meet people from all over the world. So so it was kind of interesting to meet and talk to these 4 British doctors there for a few days on the tour. So just back to the Inca historically, much is known about life in the Inca world thanks to a man named Huaman Poma, who was the son of an Inca chief. He spent 30 years between 1567 and 1650 traveling around the Inca Empire. And he wrote and illustrated what Inca life was about before, during, and after the Spanish conquest. And he had a reason for this. Poma sent his written and illustrated work to the Spanish king, pleading for better treatment for his people. But apparently the Spanish king never saw his work. But Poma's book, with its descriptions and drawings, have proved invaluable at showing what Inca life was really like during that time. And a little bit about life in the Inca world, which is the roots of Peruvian life today. The main Inca foods were potatoes, corn, and a high-protein grain called quinoa. Forgive me if I pronounced that last one wrong. But the potato was the most important vegetable, or is it a fruit? No, it's a vegetable. Don't want to do a Dan Quayle here. The Inca people had more than 200 kinds of potato, and they could be freeze-dried for long-term preservation. And the potato was so important that the length of time to boil a potato was used as a unit of time. So the potato was extremely important in Inca life. And the main source of meat, as our friends here who had already been to Peru mentioned today, were guinea pigs. Guinea pigs are raised in people's homes until needed, and they're roasted and boiled in a stew. So I've been to Peru twice, and I still haven't got enough courage up to try guinea pig in a stew, or it can be ordered to your table like roasted as well. So maybe in the third time I'll give it a try, but I just was raised around guinea pigs as pets. So for people who want to give it a try, I did have llama stew when I was there and tried out different other kinds of food, but I just couldn't eat guinea pig. But it is still a big part of the diet there. As mentioned previously, llamas and alpacas have been raised in the area for thousands of years. Huge herds provided meat, leather, sacrifices, and bones for tools, and they were also used as pack animals. The llama had coarse hair, not different from the vicuna, and the coarse hair of the llama was made into sacks, heavy blankets, and ropes. And just to note regarding ropes, knotted and colored ropes were used by the Inca for record keeping. So that's how they kept records in the Inca Empire, was through knotted and colored ropes. And softer alpaca wool was woven into clothing. And as I mentioned earlier, another animal, the vicuna, a small wild species of llama, provided the softest and finest wool for the Inca leader and the noble class, and still provides the fur today for some of the high-class sweaters that you can spend hundreds of dollars on down there and here in Canada, I'm sure. So you're going to run into different kinds of, weather as you're walking along the Inca Trail, and different kinds of terrain. And so you'll kind of walk through this mountain kind of rainforest at different points along the Inca Trail as well. So you'll go from kind of this open spaces where the wind is blowing and it's cold, and suddenly be walking into areas where you start sweating and it feels like rainforest. And so that's what we have a picture of here. And you're getting up close to the mountains here as well, and so you can see you're not too far away from the snow. We went in August, and there were days when we did face all four kinds of weather. So you're going to have hot sun, you're going to have it cold and raining, and you're going to have it snowing a little bit as well. So come prepared. On the tourist brochures, they will tell you to bring certain things for clothing. Listen to that, because there's nothing like trying to enjoy the Inca Trail, but you don't have a sweater or something, and you're freezing while doing so. So you can see we're just taking a rest here, and there's some dogs that were following us along the Inca Trail, and you can see the people going up the mountain in the background there. And so I bought a few Inca sweaters when I was down there, and I'm wearing one there, and I still have a few at home. So I bought 2 when I was there and loved them so much that when I went back last year, I bought 10 and my suitcase was just bulging when I came back, because you can't buy these kinds of sweaters here. I was looking everywhere. They even have a Peruvian store here on Commercial Drive, and at least they did a while ago, and they don't have these nice kinds of sweaters of the kind I'm wearing there. So as I mentioned earlier, come in shape. More than once we came across somebody who was getting medical attention. While on the trail, we weren't sure if the guys were having a heart attack or something, but they were looking after him. And you can see why. You're climbing up and down mountain ranges there. And that's what we climbed up the second day, I believe it was. So right from the bottom all the way up to the top, and you can see people climbing along the edge there. So it was quite grueling. It's like doing a couple of grouse grinds every day. If you've done the grouse grind once, well, maybe even more than that, because these were all day things. You go for a good hike in the morning, have lunch, then you hike up again in the afternoon. So the grouse grind takes an hour and a half. So it was actually probably like doing 3 grouse grinds in one day, going just straight up. And here's some of the old legendary Inca Road network here. So this is actually the original Inca Road from back in the 1500s. And so there are parts of the Inca Trail that do have, this road available here. So, and you want to bring your rain poncho as well, because all of a sudden it can start raining. It would just pour down for like 10 minutes, and then it would go away, and the sun would come out. But you don't want to get drenched for that 10 minutes. So you want to try to bring something along that will keep the rain off of you. And you see lakes, and there's some different kinds of birds on that lake as well, a little alpine lake there. So just a little bit about going back to the Inca here, but also this ties in with modern Peruvian life. Coca leaves were used as a sacred plant in Inca times. They were grown on large plantations. Their use was regulated by Inca rulers. The coca leaves were scattered and burned as religious offerings. They were chewed to produce a state of ecstasy during religious rituals. And because chewing coca leaves released small amounts of cocaine, it was given to workers and slaves to prevent hunger and fatigue. And today you can chew coca leaves to prevent altitude sickness in the high Andes. And you can also drink something called coca tea. So if I can give you a good piece of advice today as well, it's if you're going to go to Peru, to give yourself 2 or 3 days in Cusco to acclimatize yourself to the altitude. Because you hear about altitude sickness, and I kind of poo-pooed it thinking, I've grown up in BC, I'm a mountain guy. But all of a sudden in Cusco, you're just walking around and you feel nauseous and you don't have any energy and you're tired, and you can imagine trying to do the Inca Trail while you're feeling that way. But after 2 or 3 days in Cusco beforehand, we were okay. And we were drinking lots of this coca tea as well, which was supposed to help. So nobles also chewed coca leaves as a luxury, but habitual use was discouraged. And with regards to the Inca Road network, it's legendary. It allowed for easy access to all parts of the empire, knitting it together. Roads were basically very narrow cobble paths, as we saw on one of the previous slides here, which allowed access for walkers, runners, and pack animals. And leaders used these roads for a few basic things. The Inca leader could use the roads to quickly send soldiers to trouble spots. That was one use of the roads. They could use the Inca roads going up and down the mountains to send runners with important messages to parts of the empire. And some leaders also stored surplus food in storehouses, and in times of famine, they could use the road network to quickly transport food and prevent starvation in various parts of the empire. But unfortunately, this road network allowed for easy mobility for the Spanish and their horses when they came as well. So you're going to see some beautiful sights along the Inca Trail that you're never going to forget. And so here's an example of the kind of mountainous, cloudy terrain that you're going to see. Just another photo of a beautiful thing. And you'll see waterfalls as well. So there are glaciers there in the Andes Mountains and along the Inca Trail where you're going to be hiking. If you do go there or have been there, and as a result, there's waterfalls, and there's one that you can see there. And there's a little bird there. It didn't come out too close in the pictures, but you can see the clouds moving in. And as I said, the weather can change very quickly. The cloud banks will move in, and it's just like you're surrounded in fog, and you can't see the hand in front of your face, and then off 10 minutes later it's gone, and it's hot and sunny again. So just prepare for different kinds of weather. And so there we are just at our camp there. And in the background is our tour leader, Miguel was his name. And I forget the lady's name, but they were right on. They were really cool. They were the best tour guides that we've ever had. And so there's our tents all set up, and you can see they're pretty close together. So if you're going to make any noises during the night, other people are going to hear it. So just to give you a heads up about that, including snoring and other things. So okay. And there's no heaters in these tents, so this is literally how we slept. It's cold. You're up in the mountains, the snow's not too far away, glaciers, so you sleep with your clothes on. So there I am, that's how I slept, with a sweater, gloves, toque, underwear, wool socks, you name it. So just come prepared. And this is one of our porters here, so very happy guy. And as I said, these guys work really hard, and they run ahead of you and get your camp set up, get your lunch, your dinner ready. They have your breakfast ready in the morning, so these guys are really super guys. So different kinds of flowers you'll see in Peru as well if you're into flowers. I'm not a flower person, so I'm not even sure what these flowers are, but some kind of cacti there. But I really appreciate the beauty of what I saw. Again, different kinds of flowers, so I'm not sure what kind this is. And as you go along, you're going to run into different Inca outposts. So these were outposts where Inca soldiers were posted, and these were largely destroyed by the Spanish. But basically, they left the bases of them. So the tour guide was pointing out kind of where the old Inca work was still there, but where it had been rebuilt for the tourists along the Inca Trail. So, but that's basically how one of these outposts looked. And so people just taking a break, having a look around one of these outposts. And that's what we came down, I believe. So we came down that mountain there, and I think you can see the trail on the side of the mountain over there. So it's not easy, ladies and gentlemen, but it is one of the supreme events in your life. So if you're a hiker and you've done hiking and you have hiking as goals that you want to do in the future, some of these world-class hikes, please do the Inca Trail. But do it while you're young, because when you get to my age, the knees start to go, the back starts to go, and then you can't do things. Like I'd like to go to Kenya and do that Mount Kilimanjaro, the 5-day hike up the mountain, but I know my knees can't take it now, so a goal that I'd like to do there I can't do. And when I was in South Africa hiking up the mountain range there, I'm trying to I forget the name of it right now. it'll come to me. But my knees again swelled up there like grapefruit. So I realized that was my last. That was about 4 years ago. So that was my last big hike I was ever going to do in any mountain ranges. No, I was able to do that okay. The Vandenberg Range, or it'll come to me as I'm talking. Yeah, sorry. So just a bit about the Inca religion here. Going back into history again, the Inca revered the sun as the sole universal God who created and sustained everything through its light and power. So they were kind of like sun worshippers. It was believed that the sun was the natural father of the first Inca, or leader, and his wife, as well as all their descendants. There was a high priest who was related by blood to the Inca leader. The high priest held his position for life. He was highly revered and almost equal in authority to the Inca leader. He appointed and removed priests and had control over all shrines and temples. And the Inca, much like the First Nations people in Canada, had a strong kinship with nature. They believed in Mother Earth as being alive with supernatural powers. And much like the First Nations people in Canada, they believed in the power of omens, dreams, and visions. So as you explore the different cultures across the Americas, there are some similarities, and here are some I just mentioned, and of course there are differences as well. And they also believed in evil omens, like earthquakes, floods, and comets. And they had a famous prophecy that actually foretold the fall of the Inca Empire. And it was an ancient prophecy. And I quote, this is what the Inca believed. It says, "Strange peoples of a kind that has never been seen before would rob the Inca of their empire." So it was a prophecy that sometime in the future there would be these strange guys come that would take away their empire, and that's exactly what happened. So as I mentioned, the sun was worshipped as a god. Temples of the sun were widespread throughout Peru, the Inca Empire. And there is a temple of the sun we saw in the slides earlier that's in Cusco. Special ceremonies were held on the shortest day of the year, much like in Canada among the First Nations people here. The winter solstice was recognized as a special day, the shortest day of the year, and then after that day, the days start getting longer. It was the same among the Inca as well. And they had a special stone pillar called the hitching post of the sun that attempted to capture the sun on that day. And so at different temples, there's this pillar that was what we call a hitching post of the sun. And there's one at Machu Picchu that we'll see here in a couple of minutes here. And the return of the sun to longer days was considered a miracle and an answer to prayers. Sundials calculated the sun cycles and were used in ceremony. So these were very intelligent people. So this is something that I've taught in my probably 17-year teaching career now, that the first peoples of the Americas were really intelligent people. If you just look at the things they made, the things they constructed, the science they had, the math they had, the technology they had, they were really, really, really intelligent people, and people are starting to recognize that today. And so using calculations about the sun, the Inca developed a calendar year of 365 days, which is pretty close to the actual calendar year. And human and animal sacrifice, unfortunately, was practiced among the Inca. So human sacrifices included captives, virgin women, and children to appease various gods. But they were a society as well that had close families. They believed strongly in marriage. They were a patriarchal society. Polygamy was something practiced among the upper classes. Concubines were common. The first wife was the wife-in-chief, so to speak, and she remained so until she died, and all secondary wives were subject to her. And there's an unusual custom the Inca had. They had something called chosen women who were picked from among the nobility when they were quite young for seclusion in special convents where they were taken care of for a few years. 4 or 5 would then be chosen as brides of the sun to remain virgins for life and occasionally be sacrificed at festivals. The rest were then prepared for 2 favored men as brides, and these chosen women were then replaced by others in the convents. And so when we were in Peru, our tour guide was mentioning something about that, because there is sort of a grave site near Machu Picchu where most of the people buried there were women. And so it was figured that these women were these so-called chosen women that I just mentioned here. So here's the Inca Trail again as we're moving along through the mountains here, and you can see another outpost on the ledge of that mountain. Again, just some more beautiful shots here. You're going up and down, as I said, and another little outpost there where Inca soldiers were stationed. And you see how it's built. There's ridges along the side of the of that outpost. At some of the larger outposts, you might grow plants on some of those outposts for food and for show. But they were really made that way to buttress up the outpost so that erosion wouldn't cause it to collapse. So again, when I mentioned these guys were expert builders, here we see an example of that here. And again, you get up close to some of these and can walk around them. And there's a stairway there, so there's a way the Inca could climb up a wall. And I asked the tour guide what was this, and they said it was sort of a thing they used for astronomy. Like they would study the stars rather than be looking up all the time. They would look down into these pools of water that were caused by carving a little bit out of a rock there, as we see. And we saw these at Machu Picchu as well. So these people studied the stars and the heavens as well. So yeah, just the outpost in the mountains, and you can see the amount of tourists that are here along the trail as well. And this was just a way that they brought water into the complex. And here we're getting into rainforest again here. So again, just a variety of climate. It's kind of interesting because when you walk into rainforest, it's not just the heat you feel, but you suddenly hear insects, and so the sounds are different as well. The Inca carved this out of solid rock. There was a way to get, you couldn't get around it because there was a huge drop there. And so they carved this right out of the mountain. And the tour guide said, as you look back, it looks like South America, that design. Did you guys remember that, going through that? Oh, yeah. And there it is, just looking the other way. So it took a lot of work to carve through a solid cliff of rock. And there's a river way down there. So as I said, the Amazon River, one of the great rivers of the world, has many headwaters, and one of the headwaters is found close by here in Peru. And there's a hardworking packer again, heading to another encampment here. And here we're nearing Machu Picchu, and you can see the road where the bus will take tourists who want to do it the easy way. You can see part of the road there heading up the mountain there. So that is the other way to get up to Machu Picchu, and that's what I did last year when I was in Machu Picchu for a conference. I didn't want to do the Inca Trail again, so I took the train from Cusco to Machu Picchu, a little town that's at the base of the mountain, and then took the bus up and then the bus back down. And it was a wonderful experience as well. Just a wonderful day. It's just one of the highlights of my life. I think as I look back and look at the days of my life which really have stood out as days that I'll remember till my last day on this earth, the day I went to Machu Picchu on the train was extraordinary. Taking the train, going through country, seeing the mountains, and getting to Machu Picchu. And at the end of the day, there's a hot spring you can go visit in the town and have a nice hot spring bath at the end of the day in the little town that's at the base of the mountain there. And then we took the train back late at night in the dark, and just being around all these excited people. And like I said, it was just a wonderful day that will stand out forever in my mind. And so there's other ruins that you'll see as you go along as well. And so what archaeologists have discovered some of these places just by accident sometimes, or they've been told by farmers and so forth, or other people in the area that there's something here, and then they'll go dig, and then they'll start finding these places, and they've been covered by jungle beforehand, and so afterwards they'll clear all the jungle away, and then that's what they find underneath the jungle. So again, just beautiful scenery. And at the end of the fourth day, they sort of have a little ceremony where you're expected to put your money in tip money in an envelope and present it to the people who've worked so hard for you. And there was another custom we were told about by the tour guide. He said, if you don't want to keep your warm your underwear and your warm wool hat and your gloves and your scarves and things like that, because maybe you don't need them, after you leave Peru, you can give them to the people here who will take them back to their families. And so that's what we did. We gave away our, not realizing we had one more cold night to spend. And so we had a cold night thereafter. But, I guess felt kind of good about that. Afterwards, because I spent about $100 for this underwear, that was really lightweight and first-class underwear that you can go up Mount Everest on. And oftentimes I thought, I wonder if I should have kept that. But where would I have used that in Vancouver? And so I know that they would have got used well here in Peru. And so as you mosey along, some parts of the Inca Trail have stairs that have been carved right into the stone wall there, and so you can see that there. So a lot of effort would have gone into making these trails. And as I said, you can imagine all that jungle you see at the top just kind of covering all of that. And over time, an archaeologist, somebody would have discovered this, or the people would have told an archaeologist about it, and then they would have just started cutting down the jungle to expose what was underneath, and this is what was underneath. And people have asked, well, why all these different terraces? And why did they have their worship places at the top, at the highest point of some of these terraces sometimes? Well, it was to get close to the Creator, that's what we were told. But also, they had, as I mentioned previously, different varieties of potatoes and other vegetables that would only grow at certain heights. So they had to experiment a bit and grow things at certain heights. So marvelous people who knew what to do with regards to the food that they grow as well. So just some close-up shots here. And we're just about at Machu Picchu. And I have a habit of hitting my head, and sure enough, I was yakking away and didn't see a big branch across the trail and bumped right into it and knocked myself flat on my butt for a few minutes, and everybody was worried about me. And I did the same thing in South Africa. If any of you have been to South Africa, they have a thorny tree there with thorns about this long, and you're walking through some of the trails and you better be careful. And sure enough, I bumped into one of those and got a slice on my head about that big, and the tour guide had to stitch me up, and everybody was concerned. I says, I'm a hockey player, don't worry about it. So. And all of a sudden you pop out and you see Machu Picchu in the distance there, and you can see the road that the bus will come up. And there has been accidents. There aren't any guardrails, and if you go off the road, the bus tumbles. And apparently they have had the odd accident down through time, so you're kind of thinking about that as you're going up and down that road there on that bus. And ta-da, there we are. And there's Machu Picchu in the distance. And that famous bigger mountain, there's the two kind of twin peaks there, the smaller one and the big one. You can climb the big one as well, but it kind of takes half a day to do that, and you have to be there at a certain time early in the day to do that. So if you want to do that, you have to be ready, let them know, and be there at before noon to even start, because it takes half a day to get up that peak and back. And I just bought a couple of slides that were available just to show how beautiful Machu Picchu really looks there. It's beautiful. So just with regards to a few things here, burial customs. As I mentioned previously, a widespread practice was to bury the dead with their prized possessions, including loved ones, spouses and servants, food and wine, weapons, pottery, things like that. And when I taught a class previously about indigenous peoples of the Americas, gave this lecture, I would show a video that was about that, and it was really, really, really interesting. The reason is the Inca believed in immortality of the soul, and so these items would be needed for afterlife. And the dead were buried or put in cave tombs, and we saw an example of that in an earlier slide. Sometimes Inca mummies were unearthed in cloisters and cemeteries, all wrapped up in bundles with their prized possessions within. And so much is learned about Inca culture from such discoveries. So we had that book that was written by that Huaman Palma earlier that tells a lot about Inca life, but we can also learn a lot about Inca life by looking at their mummies today. So with regards to Machu Picchu here, it has been called the eighth wonder of the world. They had a contest a couple of years ago now, and they wanted 8 modern wonders of the world, because out of the 8 ancient wonders of the ancient world, the only one left is the Great Pyramids. All the rest are gone. So somebody did a worldwide contest to come up with the 8 wonders of the world, and this was one of them, Machu Picchu. Places like the Taj Mahal, Stonehenge, I forget what some of the other, the Great Wall of China, these were some of the other winning. But Machu Picchu was one of the winning entries for the modern eighth wonders of the world. So it is located on a mountaintop, as you see there, about 2,300 meters above sea level in a remote setting with dense rainforest close by. The inhabitants appear to have abandoned the city over 400 years ago. The reason is a bit of a mystery. They don't know if it was because of disease, famine, drought, they're not sure. But the Spanish never found Machu Picchu. As our tour guide said, we know they didn't find it because if they had, they would have built a church on it. So we don't see a church there. So we know the Spanish didn't find it. So as we can see in the picture, Machu Picchu is composed of outer and inner walls, huge terraces for agriculture, alleys, side streets, more than 100 stairways carved into rock, water and irrigation systems to carry water throughout the city, a large sacred plaza, temples, and rock homes for everyday living. And there was also in this city one of those hitching posts I mentioned earlier, hitching post of the sun, which reveals that sun worship took place here. And as I mentioned earlier as well, there was a nearby cemetery that was discovered. The graves revealed mostly female bodies in there. It was thus speculated that this was an ancient sanctuary for the chosen women that I mentioned earlier, and accompanying priestesses and priests. And so Machu Picchu was largely hidden from most of the world for centuries, but it was rediscovered, and I say rediscovered, by an American archaeologist, Hiram Bingham, in 1911. But I say rediscovered because local farmers were aware of this. In fact, they told him about it. They says, well, you should go up to the top of this mountain because there's this interesting city up there. So he went up there, and he was famous after that for discovering Machu Picchu. So thus it goes with archaeologists in the early 20th century. So today it's a world-class United Nations protected tourist destination, and it's a wonderful glimpse into the Inca past here. So I just do have a few more. Oops, I'll go backwards here. So when we saw the city at the end, close to the end of the fourth day, it was nice and sunny. So we had about an hour to walk around it when it was nice weather. And we came back the next day for the full day tour of the site. And it was raining like crazy and cloudy like crazy. And you can see that here in some of these pictures. You couldn't even hardly see your hand in front of your face. But what's interesting, they were wondering what this was. They thought it was a place to sacrifice animals and perhaps people. But the little peak you see on the altar there matches up with that peak just above it there in the background. So they figure there's something kind of correlating there. And a wonderful architecture. The way they built their walls and their doorways. So you can spend a whole, if you go there for the first time, you're amazed, and you spend a whole day just looking at everything. And when I went back last year, I spent about an hour running around looking at it, and went down and had a nice hot soak in the sauna. That's what I was more looking forward to. But the first time you're there, it's really breathtaking. And you can imagine those stone houses would have had thatched roofs on them back in Inca times. And that's the kind of roof they would have had on them. So that's kind of a tourist rest site. You can sort of sit down and out of the shade and out of the rain. But as I said, it was raining so hard, my camera started to fog up. So I actually lost a lot of pictures here. So some of them didn't turn out. And inside, they didn't use nails, but so to create the roofs of their houses, they ended up using the branches of forest and things like that to wind around and keep their wood beams together. So you can see how rainy it was that day. But I just bought a couple of slides. And so here's an example of the kind of terraces that kept the place from falling down. So these terraces were created so that it wouldn't crumble, and so they're still standing today. So after 500 years, if it's still something is still standing, then it certainly works. And I asked what this was, and the tour guide said it's the representation of a condor, I think, as I remember it. And so you can see the white ring that goes around the back of the condor's neck there. I don't know what these guys were doing. They were doing something weird. There was some kind of religious thing there. You get a lot of the tour guide said that too. You get these religious groups that are a little bit odd from different parts. With respect, I'm saying that come from different parts of the world to this sacred place, and they want to do a sacred ceremony there. And that's what these guys were doing. They were doing some kind of chanting, as I recall. But again, just to show how well made the walls were, you couldn't put a piece of paper between them if you tried. And just to show how the water system worked there. So again, just to show how the water system worked, I had to buy some of these slides. And a stairway carved right out of stone. So excellent stonemasons. And again, this is one of those astronomy things. So rather than look up, they look down. I'm not sure why that was, but that's what the tour guide said. So that's another thing in common they had with other peoples in the Americas was their study of the stars. So I also taught about the people of the American Southwest and some of their wonderful astronomical achievements there that they did. And so that's another similarity is that different peoples around the Americas before the coming of the Europeans were really intelligent people with regards to the study of sciences like astronomy. I'm not sure what that was. But again, just a few other pictures here. Hopefully you'll have good weather when you're there if you're heading that way. They actually buried some mummies in the walls here at Machu Picchu, so here's an example of that. So they would have put mummies with their possessions in the wall there. So, and they have some llamas there at Machu Picchu. And here's that hitching post of the sun that was created to hopefully hook the sun on December 21st so it would stick around, and because it did, it was viewed as working. And they were quite mad because a German film crew had apparently been here a year or two before and was doing a commercial here, and a piece of equipment dropped and broke a piece off the historical hitching post. So after that, they're very careful about who they allow to do commercials around Machu Picchu. And we asked what this was, and they says, well, it could be a post to put a flag in, or they thought maybe to, protect the nobility who live close by. They tie up a wild animal or something there. That's what that kind of hitching thing is there. But again, pretty foggy. But it's just a wonderful place to be. And there you see some of the terraces for growing different kinds of food. But sometimes they just use the terraces to grow not food, but just plants to make it look nice, and that's what we see here. And just a nice shot. I think I bought this slide, and they just the shadows matching up with a design on the wall there. This was the bed of the Inca, or the leader of the Inca peoples. And, so he had many wives, a lot of concubines. So, they had a big bed there for him and his many wives. And then after you're finished, you head down the mountain, praying your bus doesn't go over the edge. And then you go shopping, right? Ladies. And then you can take the train back to Cusco. And there we are at the start. So with regards to the indigenous peoples in Peru and in North America, Canada, there were many similarities. They had a strong belief in family and marriage. They were intelligent people, as we see in their construction here. And if you were to study the construction of the longhouses on the west coast, or the living accommodations of other people across Canada, it shows their intelligence and their great artwork. They used materials in the world about them to create the life that they lived, adapting to their unique environments. They were spiritual people. There wasn't one indigenous group that didn't have a belief in a creator and other spiritual beings and forces. But unfortunately, indigenous peoples all over the America also have the similar background of being overrun by Europeans. The Spanish in this part of the world, and the British and the French in the Northern Hemisphere. So those are some of the similarities, but the differences, of course, because of the environment, the houses were different, foods were different, their gods were different. Their society was structured different, of course. And they had empires in South America, Central America, of a kind that really wasn't here in Canada, unless you count the Cree, we're everywhere, right? So they managed to rule other indigenous peoples. So there are some differences and similarities. So, and just to finish off this part of the lecture here today, I was so enthralled afterwards that when I got back from Peru, I wrote one of these postcard travel articles for the Vancouver Sun about the Inca Trail, and it got published. So some of you might be writers in here or thinking about writing and burgeoning writers. And, I began by writing indignant letters to the newspaper about First Nations issues, and they got published, surprisingly to me at the time. So I moved on to writing essays, for travel essays. I think I got 5 published over time. And then I started moving on to academic writing. So if some of you are thinking about writing, and I'd like to write, like to get published, just how it worked for me anyway, is I started small with letters to the newspapers, essays, and then moved on to academic writing. And as you get published in these different areas, you start gaining confidence as a writer. So, yeah, so there it is. So I hope that you're able to learn something tonight, kind of a mixture of old and new about the Inca in past times. I know we kind of went through it quick. Usually it would take a couple of lectures over a couple of classes if you were students to write all the notes, and then I give you a test on it, but we won't surprise you with an exam today. But hopefully you remember something from our lecture about the Inca and also modern day Peru. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming out, folks. Right?
All right, we have time for a few questions for William, if you wouldn't mind staying for a bit. Just we are recording this, so if you could speak into the microphone. Does anyone have any questions?
Oh, sure. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Could you please tell a couple of things about languages they spoke? Did we have like one official language, or they had many dialects?
In Peru?
Yeah. Well, not now, but in Inca Empire, if there is any information about that. Like when Spanish came, what did they speak,
Yeah, they were speaking, the main language was Quechua. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but it's spelled Quechua, Quechua. Yeah, that was the main language of the empire, although the languages of the people that they had conquered were also still being spoken in the empire as well. So those languages are still there today. Quechua, the language of the Inca, is still spoken because the empire fell didn't mean the culture totally went away. And the indigenous languages are there today as well. But Spanish is the predominant language down there today. Yeah. In Canada, it's different. We have 52 different First Nations languages in this country, ladies and gentlemen, and that doesn't count the Métis language, Machif. And we have 32 different First Nations languages that were spoken in British Columbia in traditional times. So, in British Columbia, we had more than half of Canada's First Nations language spoken just in what became British Columbia. So just a side issue about Canada. So, yes.
Okay, so given your background academically, professionally, in sort of indigenous issues, I'm wondering if you could comment on sort of the impact of this culture history, the tourism that's going on issues of identity among sort of the descendants of Inca or Inca people today in Peru, and possibly even sort of that appropriation of people coming and going to Machu Picchu and sort of having these rituals.
Yeah. Well, I know from my discussions down there that they appreciate the tourist dollars coming in, and that's even the indigenous peoples, because those workers that we saw on the slides that were hauling the stuff on the trail were all indigenous peoples. And so they want tourists to come because that's their bread on their table. And so Peru's kind of adapting to the tourists. I noticed when I went back last year, after this trip was taken 9 years ago, I went back last year, and the airport in Lima and Cusco had both been improved very much from the times that I had been there before, 9 years before. So they're trying to, and I know the cab drivers appreciate, so people do appreciate the tourists coming, but I know they're starting to clamp down a bit because now You have to reserve your spot on the Inca Trail. You have to go with a tour group. You can't just go alone. So they just don't want people wandering off and doing whatever they want on the trail. And I think there's talk about doing that at Machu Picchu as well, because there's so many people there that it's just dirt there now because there's so many people walking all over the grass. But on the other hand, there is the issue of modernity, and so I've often been asked that, like about issues of assimilation. As a First Nations person in this country, how do you balance the past and the present? And I'm sure this is a question they have as well. And my answer to people, just from my experience and what I've seen in my life, is that First Nations cultures have always evolved, Indigenous cultures have always evolved depending on the circumstances, and that's what they're doing today. So, I work in a modern university, I wear modern clothes, I drive a car, but I also have tremendous pride in my Aboriginal history and my Aboriginal heritage and my Aboriginal culture. And that's what I see among our Aboriginal young people today as well. So it's kind of, they're getting the best of both worlds today, if I can put it that way. Whereas when I was young and growing up, we were kind of stuck, we didn't know where we belonged, if I can put it that way. And my parents' generation and going back even further, people didn't know where they belonged because of the racism, discrimination, the residential school issue. So they were kind of caught between two worlds, not knowing where they belonged. And I remember feeling that way myself, but it's different now. And so that's how I feel the people of Peru feel as well, that they're adaptable, that they're happy to live in the modern world and progress, but they also have pride in their history and heritage. And they will always have that, and that will be passed on to their children. So yeah. Does that sort of answer your question? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. So when
you saw the slide of the statues in the church in Cusco, you said that there were also Inca, I think you said Inca drawings just below the statues. How did that come about?
Because in the churches?
In the statues in the churches.
Yeah, those wooden carvings that were done, yes. Yeah. Well, what happened was the people who actually did the work were Inca people.
Really?
This is back in the 1600s.
And how did that happen? It must have been very, because I guess it must have been very strange for them, because they had their own they had their own worship and their own beliefs.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
They were forced to work on the church. Is that right?
Okay. They were basically enslaved by the Spanish, and the Spanish put them to work building the churches and doing all those carvings that we saw inside. But as a form of rebellion and as a way to hold on to their own religious beliefs, in the midst of those beautiful wooden carvings you see in these churches that are 400 plus years old, you recognize the European stuff, but also in there, and it was pointed out by the tour guide when we were touring the churches, there's the Inca stuff. And it wasn't really as overt, so it was sort of done, a little bit clandestinely, if I can put it that way. Yeah. But it's there, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Got time for one more question. Anyone else?
So you ready for Machu Picchu, lads, and the Inca Trail? We have 4 gentlemen here who are going to do the Inca Trail in Machu Picchu in 2 months, in January, yeah? So, yeah.
Well, I think on behalf... Oh, we do have one more question.
Just a simple question. What's the best time of the year to go along the trail?
Well, we went in the August, which is summer for us, but it was winter for them, and but they said the weather would be okay, but we did experience all 4 seasons, and so if you want to go during their summertime, it's best to go when the lads are going, which is in January, which is their summertime, which is our winter time, right? But you're still going to experience different weather because you're up high in the mountains, so. Yeah, so you want to dress appropriately, that's for sure. So, and it's pretty cheap, by the way. We've had to save up and go on some really expensive trips to other parts of the world, but me and my missus went on this trip only 9 years ago for about, I think, $5,000 or $6,000 total for 2 of us. And that included the airfare, the tour, the hotels, everything when we were in Cusco and stuff like that. So I don't think it's gone up, that much. So it's a cheap place to go compared to other places in the world, because the airfare is probably the biggest cost you'll have. Yeah. So it's not an expensive place to go either. So, yeah.
I just, on behalf of SFU's Vancity Office of Community Engagement, wanted to welcome you, William, for coming out and sharing this conversation tonight. And thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Hey, thanks for coming out, guys. Thanks.